A black executive walks into the hotel she built. The front desk turns her away, and security starts watching her. What they don't know? She's not here to check in. She's here to find out who doesn't deserve their job. Camille Brooks entered the lobby of the Wexley Grand, her flagship hotel in downtown Chicago. It was early evening, and guests moved casually around the space, checking phones or quietly talking. At 47, Camille typically carried herself with quiet authority. But today, she appeared without any markers of status or importance. Dressed simply in casual trousers and a modest blouse, she blended in easily. At the reception desk, Jordan glanced up briefly from her computer, offering Camille a practiced professional smile. Young and confident, Jordan had perfected the polite yet distant demeanor required by the hotel's high standards. "Good evening," Jordan said politely. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," Camille replied calmly. "I'd like a room for tonight, please." Jordan paused, subtly assessing Camille's appearance before responding. The hesitation in her voice was barely noticeable. "I'm sorry, but here at the Wexley Grand, we require all guests to have confirmed reservations in advance. Hotel policy." Camille didn't immediately respond. Instead, she simply stood, maintaining steady eye contact with Jordan without hostility or impatience. Jordan shifted slightly, clearly unsettled by Camille's quiet but firm presence. A security guard standing nearby noticed the subtle exchange and stepped closer, watching cautiously. Camille calmly observed the guard's movement but made no comment. She stayed composed, allowing the tension to build naturally. After an uncomfortable silence, Jordan cleared her throat quietly, trying to maintain her professional composure. "Perhaps you might find another hotel nearby more accommodating," Jordan suggested carefully. "One that allows walk-ins." Camille looked directly into Jordan's eyes, speaking softly but firmly. "Thank you, but I prefer to stay here." Jordan's carefully maintained politeness briefly faltered. The subtle tension lingered quietly between them, unnoticed by the other guests passing through the lobby, oblivious to the scene unfolding at the front desk. Jordan looked briefly away from Camille, visibly uncomfortable, before pressing a small button behind the desk. Moments later, a man in a dark suit appeared from a side hallway, approaching calmly. Neil, the shift manager, was younger than Camille expected. Late 30s, perhaps. Neat hair and crisp attire suggesting careful attention to appearances. He approached with the composed professionalism expected at the Wexley Grand, nodding politely at Camille as he reached the front desk. "What seems to be the issue, Jordan?" Neil asked softly, glancing carefully at Camille. Jordan leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but still audible enough to reach Camille. "This guest doesn't have a reservation," Jordan explained simply. "She's requesting a room." Neil nodded, turning to Camille with professional courtesy. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Neil, the shift manager. Could you please provide me some identification so we can better assist you?" "Of course," Camille replied, her voice even. She calmly reached into her small purse, pulling out an internal ID card clearly marked the Wexley Hotel Group, executive level. Without further explanation, she handed it quietly to Neil. Neil took the card, eyes briefly scanning it. For a moment he hesitated, eyebrows slightly furrowed. But then, dismissively, he handed the card back, unaffected. "I appreciate this, Ms. Brooks. Unfortunately, we require valid government-issued identification alongside a confirmed reservation to proceed with check-in. It's standard hotel policy." Camille took back the ID without argument, carefully observing Neil's indifferent expression. A subtle flicker of surprise crossed her eyes, though her overall demeanor remained calm and poised. Around them, guests continued moving through the lobby, unaware of the growing tension at the front desk. Neil cleared his throat gently, visibly confident that he'd handled the situation professionally. "If you would like, I can recommend another nearby property that may accommodate guests without prior reservations." Camille offered a faint, polite smile, shaking her head gently. "I prefer to stay here," she said simply. Neil's practiced composure showed a slight crack, his lips tightening subtly. He exchanged a glance with Jordan before turning back to Camille, choosing his words carefully. "I'm afraid there's really nothing more we can do here, ma'am. It wouldn't be fair to our other guests to make exceptions. I'm sure you understand." Jordan nodded slightly, emboldened by Neil's support, and finally allowed herself a faint, slightly smug smile. She leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but carrying an edge of mild sarcasm. "We can't just let anyone walk in and claim to be important, right?" Camille turned her gaze slowly to Jordan, her eyes calm but unwavering. For a brief moment, silence lingered between them, a charged tension evident without anyone needing to raise their voice. Camille quietly reached back into her purse, calmly pulling out a sleek phone, never breaking eye contact. She dialed with deliberate slowness, clearly making a choice to let each moment of silence grow slightly more uncomfortable. Jordan's smugness faded slightly as Camille's unhurried movements built quiet tension, though Jordan attempted to hold her confidence intact. Neil's eyes darted briefly toward a security guard who had begun drifting subtly closer, watchful but not intrusive. Camille calmly noticed the guard's movement, but again, she offered no reaction beyond quiet observation. The phone call connected quietly. Camille's voice came measured, clear, and calm, each word precisely chosen. "Yes, good evening," Camille said simply, softly but loud enough for Jordan and Neil to hear clearly. "Connect me to Director Spencer immediately." Neil's composure briefly faltered. Jordan's expression shifted rapidly from confident to uncertain. "Tell him Camille Brooks is currently being denied entry in the lobby of her own hotel," Camille continued calmly, her voice carrying unmistakable authority even at low volume. She paused, the silence after her words stretching into tension that grew heavier with every passing second. Jordan's eyes widened slightly, flicking nervously toward Neil. Neil's previously confident posture now visibly stiffened, his breathing subtly quickening. Camille quietly ended the call, smoothly sliding the phone back into her purse. She didn't speak again, calmly waiting. Jordan's hand tightened subtly on the counter, fingernails briefly pressing into the polished surface. Neil's jaw set rigidly, clearly tense but determined to maintain his professional front. The security guard, sensing the clear escalation in tension, cautiously stepped closer, eyes carefully fixed on Camille. Yet she paid him no visible attention. Her gaze remained level, patiently watching Jordan and Neil, leaving the next move clearly to them. The tension continued building steadily, the subtle but palpable silence thickening around them as they all waited quietly for Director Spencer's imminent arrival. The lobby was unusually quiet, tension hanging clearly between Camille, Jordan, and Neil. Just as Neil started to say something, to regain some control over the rapidly slipping situation, a soft ding from the nearby elevator cut through the silence. Everyone turned instinctively toward the sound. The elevator doors opened smoothly, revealing 3 people stepping forward with decisive, confident strides. Director Spencer led the group, a man in his early 50s whose presence alone commanded attention, followed closely by 2 senior executives from the hotel's corporate management team. Their sharp business suits and serious expressions signaled clearly that this was no routine visit. Spencer's face, usually calm and reserved, showed subtle signs of tension as his eyes immediately found Camille. Jordan's face drained of all color, her professional facade shattering instantly. Her carefully manicured fingers gripped the edge of the reception desk tightly, betraying sudden, intense anxiety. Neil straightened his posture, clearing his throat quietly, visibly struggling to appear calm. Yet the faint tremble in his hands betrayed the stress now coursing through him. Spencer approached Camille deliberately, stopping a respectful distance in front of her. He glanced briefly around the lobby, taking in the guests moving unaware of the unfolding scene, before turning fully toward Camille. His expression softened, visibly embarrassed. "Ms. Brooks," Spencer began quietly, lowering his head slightly as a gesture of sincere apology. I'm not sure how this happened." Camille studied Spencer briefly, her gaze calm but penetrating. "No," Camille replied softly, her tone controlled but firm. "I think it's clear exactly how this happened." Spencer nodded slowly, acknowledging her point without further argument. Jordan swallowed visibly, now fully understanding the gravity of her earlier actions. Neil shifted his weight subtly, clearly uncomfortable but determined not to openly show weakness. The two senior executives standing just behind Spencer exchanged quick, concerned glances, visibly apprehensive about the implications of Camille's presence and Spencer's tone. Spencer raised his head slightly, attempting to regain some sense of leadership. "I assure you, Ms. Brooks, this is not reflective of our usual standards." Camille raised her hand slightly, gently interrupting him without aggression. Spencer immediately fell silent, clearly aware of who held authority in this conversation. "You don't need to assure me of anything," Camille said, her voice steady and even. "I'm not here because I needed a room. I came to see firsthand how power is perceived when it doesn't arrive wearing a suit or flashing a title." A brief silence followed her words, lingering heavily in the air. Spencer blinked slowly, absorbing the depth of her statement. Jordan looked downward, visibly ashamed, yet trying to hide her discomfort. Neil's gaze remained fixed on a distant spot, unwilling to make eye contact with anyone, his expression tense. Camille turned slowly, facing Jordan and Neil directly, her voice maintaining its calm clarity. "Let's be clear," she said firmly. "This is not an isolated issue. It's a symptom of a deeper, more serious problem within this establishment." Jordan's eyes widened slightly, realization dawning fully. Neil clenched his jaw, clearly recognizing the professional ramifications that now seemed inevitable. Camille continued softly, her words landing precisely, each carefully chosen. "What I saw tonight was not hospitality. It was judgment, suspicion, and dismissal. That is not the culture we built here, and it certainly isn't the culture I will tolerate." Spencer exhaled slowly, clearly taking responsibility without protest. "You're right, Ms. Brooks. This is a failing on our part." Camille acknowledged Spencer's acceptance with a brief nod. "It's more than just a failing," Camille stated quietly. "It's a wake-up call." She looked deliberately toward Jordan, who was now clearly shaken, hands still gripping the counter nervously. "I don't need apologies or promises," Camille said firmly but gently. "What I need is immediate action." Neil looked up briefly, anxious but attentive, waiting to hear her next words. Spencer squared his shoulders slightly, clearly ready to comply with whatever directive came next. Camille met Spencer's eyes directly, speaking clearly for everyone to hear. "I want an emergency staff meeting organized tonight. Every single person working in this building. Everyone." Spencer nodded immediately, no hesitation. "Understood, Ms. Brooks. We'll have everyone assembled." The security guard, now standing quietly nearby, relaxed slightly, recognizing the shift in power and authority clearly established. Neil breathed quietly, a sense of dread evident in the subtle lines around his eyes. Jordan visibly shrank behind the desk, her confidence completely shattered. Camille took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance slightly between herself and the staff gathered around her. "Tonight, we begin addressing this problem at its root," Camille declared evenly. "Because respect should never depend on titles or clothing or the appearance of power. Real authority doesn't wear a name tag." Spencer nodded firmly, clearly agreeing. "We'll handle this immediately," he confirmed again, turning quickly toward the senior executives, who silently indicated their full support. Camille didn't respond immediately, letting the silence linger once more, reinforcing the seriousness of the moment. The tension in the lobby had shifted clearly, no longer from suspicion, but from accountability and consequence. Finally, Camille stepped back slightly, indicating the conversation was concluded for now. "I'll be waiting," she said simply, quietly, and with unmistakable finality. Jordan's shoulders dropped slightly, Neil's jaw unclenched, and Spencer immediately moved into action, issuing swift orders to the executives beside him. Camille remained standing quietly in the lobby, silently observing as the wheels of consequence began to turn. The hotel's grand conference room filled quickly, a quiet, heavy tension spreading across the gathered staff. Employees entered cautiously, taking seats and exchanging uncertain glances. At the front, Director Spencer stood beside Camille Brooks, his expression clearly uncomfortable but resolute. Camille waited silently, her posture calm, eyes briefly meeting those of various employees as they settled. Jordan entered hesitantly, avoiding Camille's gaze as she quickly took a seat toward the back. Neil arrived soon after, jaw tight, posture rigid, carefully choosing a spot next to Jordan. Neither spoke or made eye contact, clearly aware of the gravity surrounding them. Spencer stepped forward, briefly clearing his throat to gather attention. The low hum of whispers quieted immediately, the room waiting tensely. "Thank you all for attending on such short notice," Spencer began cautiously, glancing briefly toward Camille. "Tonight's meeting is critical, and it will not be easy. To explain further, I'd like to introduce Ms. Camille Brooks." Our CEOA ripple of surprise swept quietly through the room. Eyes widening, heads turning. Camille stepped forward, her movements deliberate and measured. "Good evening," Camille said calmly, her voice steady and clear, commanding immediate attention. 3 months ago, I began receiving multiple complaints about subtle discrimination within the Wexley Grand. Guests feeling dismissed, judged, or unwelcome. Initially, I believed these might be isolated incidents, misunderstandings perhaps. Yet they kept coming, consistent and troubling. The room was completely silent now, every eye fixed attentively on Camille. Jordan shifted uneasily, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Neil's eyes remained fixed on the tabletop, his breathing subtly shallow. Camille continued, her voice firm, but without aggression. "I needed to see firsthand how our guests were being treated when no one thought they were being watched. So, tonight was an internal audit, a carefully planned test." She paused briefly, allowing the room to absorb the impact of her words fully. "What I discovered tonight confirmed these reports," Camille added, her tone even, but filled with quiet authority. "We have a serious problem here, one that goes beyond individuals. It reflects a deeper cultural issue within our staff." Camille slowly turned her gaze toward the back of the room, locking eyes momentarily with Jordan. "I do not expect apologies tonight," Camille said gently but firmly. "I need accountability. Starting immediately, we will comprehensively overhaul our guest reception policy. There will be zero tolerance for judgments based on appearance, ethnicity, or perceived status. It ends here, and it ends tonight." Silence followed her announcement, tension palpable. Camille's eyes swept the room, clearly gauging reactions. Staff members sat quietly, expressions ranging from thoughtful introspection to cautious embarrassment. Camille's eyes settled again briefly on Jordan and Neil. "Jordan, Neil, please remain after the meeting," Camille requested simply. "We need to talk privately." After Camille's announcement, a low murmur briefly filled the room, fading quickly into silence as Director Spencer raised his hand slightly, calling attention back. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks," Spencer said clearly, careful authority in his voice. "I promise everyone here, we will take immediate steps to address these problems. Each of you will play a vital role in making sure this never happens again. More details will follow. Staff members began quietly standing and making their way out of the conference room, exchanging cautious glances, but avoiding eye contact with Camille as they passed. Camille remained standing at the front, silently watching as the room emptied, leaving only Spencer, Neil, and Jordan behind. As soon as the door quietly closed behind the last employee, Camille stepped toward Jordan, meeting her eyes directly. Jordan visibly stiffened, clearly expecting reprimand or anger, but Camille's expression remained calm, professional, and focused. "Jordan," Camille began gently, "I'm not here to yell at you or threaten you, but I want you to remember my face, not because I'm someone important, but because I represent every single person who walked into this lobby and felt dismissed by you." Jordan's face reddened deeply, eyes flickering downward in genuine shame. I didn't," Jordan started, her voice trailing off, uncertain. "You didn't realize," Camille finished softly for her. "And that's exactly the problem. From this moment, you're officially suspended pending an internal review. You'll have an opportunity to reconsider what it means to serve guests." Jordan nodded silently, visibly shaken but accepting Camille's words without argument. Camille turned slowly toward Neil, whose posture had noticeably stiffened further. "Neil, you'll be transferred to another department immediately," Camille said simply. "You're no longer fit to manage guest interactions. Perhaps a different role will give you perspective." Neil's lips tightened momentarily, but he nodded, clearly understanding the finality in her tone. Camille paused, glancing back to Spencer. "Director Spencer, let's ensure the revised policies are drafted and ready by tomorrow," Camille instructed. "We'll start fresh training sessions immediately, no exceptions." "Understood," Spencer confirmed firmly, clearly committed to Camille's directives. Just then, a voice quietly interrupted from the doorway. An older man in maintenance coveralls stepped hesitantly into the room, holding a worn cap in his hands respectfully. Spencer turned toward him with slight surprise, but Camille recognized him immediately. "Mr. Hill?" Camille asked gently, inviting him to speak. The older man cleared his throat carefully, addressing everyone quietly. "Ms. Brooks gave me a second chance years ago when no one else would," he began softly. "Tonight, she spoke for a lot of people here. People afraid to speak up themselves. We owe her better. We owe ourselves better." Camille offered Mr. Hill a grateful nod, silently acknowledging his courage. She turned back to Spencer and the remaining staff, her voice now calm, but deeply resolved. "Let's begin again," Camille said clearly. "Starting right now." Early the next morning, Camille Brooks walked quietly through the lobby of the Wexley Grand, moving toward the exit with calm assurance. Employees stood silently at their stations, their eyes carefully avoiding her direct gaze. The same security guard from the night before stepped respectfully aside, clearly aware of the shift in power dynamics. Jordan stood quietly near the reception desk, eyes downcast, visibly chastened. Neil, now dressed casually, lingered near the office entrance, quietly reflective. Camille paused briefly at the main entrance, turning slightly to address Spencer and the small group of executives standing respectfully behind him. "Real power doesn't need to announce itself with a title or a business card," Camille stated calmly, her voice clear and firm. "It just needs to show up and let others realize their mistake." Nobody responded. Nobody challenged her. The silence spoke louder than any apology. She stepped outside into the morning light, leaving behind an unmistakable atmosphere of reflection and accountability. If you've ever felt invisible in a place you helped build, share this story, speak up, and subscribe if you believe power doesn't need permission.